This week I want to talk to you about something that is a little bit misunderstood in the world of photography. A little thing called aperture. And today I'm going to break it all down for you in one short video. Let's get into this. Before we do though, if you're new around here and this is the first video of mine that you've found, that's awesome. My name's Ben and I create videos about photography and how to use photography to better your mental health, as well as general photography adventures. So if that sounds like something you would be into, hit that subscribe button, as it would be amazing to have you tag along for all the future adventures and photography content on this channel. Okay, so I'm assuming you know about the exposure triangle and how it works. If not, then you can watch this more in-depth video up here about just that. But as a quick rundown, the exposure triangle consists of 3 variables, which all work together to control your overall exposure and the amount of light hitting your sensor. However, it's not its only purpose, as we'll discuss later on in the video. Aperture is designed to work in the same way as the human eye. When your eyes are exposed to bright daytime light, the pupil will shrink, reducing the amount of light entering your eyes, and vice versa. The aperture on your camera works in exactly the same way. By increasing the size of your aperture, which is essentially your camera's pupil, you're exposing the sensor to more light. Now, what a lot of beginner photographers misunderstand is that a wider aperture, a bigger opening in the iris, does not mean a bigger f-stop. In actual fact, it's the opposite way round. Let me explain. The smaller the f-stop, for example f2.8, equals a larger aperture, which is a bigger opening in the iris. This is why you will often hear photographers refer to as f2.8 as shooting wide open. That's because the iris is wide open. On the other hand, shooting at a larger f-stop, for example f16, equals a narrower or smaller aperture, resulting in less light hitting the sensor. To explain this a little better, I've created this diagram. And as you can see here, we have the sun on our right hand side, which is our light source, and our camera and lens on the left. So let's say we set our lens to an aperture of f2.8, which as discussed earlier means the lens iris is wide open, and on my main 2 lenses, f2.8 is the largest aperture that I have available to me. However, there are some lenses that have a wider aperture than that of f1.8, but the same principle applies. So if we set the aperture to f2.8, we can see that there is a lot of light entering our camera's sensor, as seen here. But what happens if we want to use the aperture to reduce the amount of light entering the camera? To do this, we can simply decrease our aperture to f16. And again, the bigger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture. What you will notice now is with the size of our iris dramatically reduced, so is the amount of light hitting our sensor. Now, earlier in the video, I said that controlling the amount of light entering your camera isn't the aperture's only job. But what did I mean by that? Well, if you have seen my video about the exposure triangle or know exactly how shutter speed works, you will know that aside from controlling the amount of light hitting our sensor, there is also an artistic choice behind using a longer shutter speed, which is referred to as taking a long exposure. It is also used by landscape photographers like myself to control the amount of texture that moving water has. A higher shutter speed will freeze the water, as a longer shutter speed will capture the motion in the water. What I'm trying to say is, like shutter speed, there is an artistic choice behind choosing which aperture to use. What I mean by this is by increasing your aperture to f2.8, this will indeed increase the amount of light hitting your sensor. However, it will give you a very shallow depth of field. On the opposite hand, shooting with a smaller aperture, say f16, will allow you to capture your scene with a lot more in focus, as well as less light hitting your sensor. Now, this allows you to have a large amount of creative control when it comes to capturing your scene. For example, shooting at f2.8 with that shallow depth of field will really focus your eye in on the subject, giving you that smooth, blurry background and that amazing bokeh. Whereas say f8 or f16 will allow you to capture a scene that has a deeper depth of field, which is why most landscape photographers use a smaller aperture. This also opens up the opportunity to capture photos using techniques such as focus stacking. I also have an in-depth video on this channel about how to create a focus stacked image, so if you're interested in learning how to achieve something like this, then click up here to watch that video. This creative aspect of Aperture is what I feel most beginner photographers are aware of and understand. But if not, here are a couple of examples of deep and shallow depth of field using a couple of my previous photos. As you can see here, the image on the left is captured using an aperture of f2.8, giving you that blurry background, whilst letting in as much light as possible, in contrast to the image on the right that is captured using f16, resulting in more of your scene being in focus, which also results in less light hitting your sensor. Naturally, you will have to compensate for the light using your ISO or shutter speed, as explained more in my exposure triangle video. Again, you can click up here or down in the video description to check that video out. So to conclude, a smaller f-stop like f2.8 equals a larger aperture, resulting in a shallower depth of field. A larger f-stop like f16 equals a smaller aperture, resulting in a deeper depth of field. Aperture not only controls the amount of light entering your camera, but will also influence your artistic choices by controlling how much of your scene is in focus. If you want a deeper or shallower depth of field, you will most likely need to adjust your other camera settings to compensate for the light and to balance out your exposure. So I hope this video has helped you to understand Aperture a little more. If it did, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell notification to be notified when a new video does go live. And as always, I'll see you next week for the next one.